Hello and welcome back to Autism Unpacked. I'm your host, Rosie Gilmoss, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about paediatric feeding and eating disorders. To help us unpack this, I'm thrilled to be joined by Natalie Raven Morris, the founder and CEO of the Feeding Trust, an organisation doing incredible work in this space. Natalie not only brings a wealth of professional experience, but also a deep personal passion for helping families navigate the tricky and sometimes downright terrifying world of paediatric feeding and eating disorders. We're talking feeding and eating disorders today and moving the conversation onto diagnosis, advice and support for parents. Welcome back, Natalie. Now, we've talked about what ARFID might present like in a child, we've talked about the causes of it, and we've discussed a few of the solutions that parents can employ. Now, if you, as a parent or a carer, suspect that your child might have ARFID, what are the next steps towards getting a diagnosis and support?
So I think the first step is your GP. Yeah,
right.
That's unfortunately we have to go via the GP for when we are looking for a diagnosis of any sort, and that is a bit of a barrier, as we know, because we know that when children are presenting with feeding differences, they don't always present as underweight, and that does often come with some challenges in terms of the GP taking your concerns seriously. One of the things we've got on our website is a sort of like a checklist that parents can download and sort of take to the GP that actually differentiates. This is what picky eating is, and actually, this is a proper feeding problem here. And I think it's probably important to sort of go in with the evidence that shows that your child is really struggling, and what we would recommend that parents do is collect the information, have videos as well, because often GPs will just be like, they just have videos of actually the child, the child gagging, the child vomiting when they're trying to eat. It's not very nice, but actually it helps form a picture and provides the GP with evidence that this is a real problem, because a lot of our parents are unfortunately dismissed. But I would also say go in with an open mind in terms of, say, don't automatically go in and say it's ARFID.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because we chatted a little bit earlier on about how ARFID is a mental health diagnosis, and how the treatments for ARFID are, generally speaking, delivered by eating disorder services, and they're designed for children who are verbal and can engage in sort of cognitive behaviour therapy type approaches. Now, a lot of autistic children are non-speaking or have got an element of communication delay as part of their autism diagnosis, and they would find engaging with those sort of services really, really challenging, and often they're not set up to meet the needs of those children. And as a result, I've certainly come across parents who think, my child's not eating, therefore they've got ARFID. They've gone to the doctors, they sought that eating disorder referral, and when they've got to the eating disorder service, they've been effectively turned away.
Right.
Because the child can't access the services because they're not speaking or what have you. And so what I would say is, don't get hung up on the diagnostic term. Have a look at actually what are your child's challenges and who is best placed to support that. So we would always say, gather information around, are there any medical issues here? Are there any drivers, like we talked about, gastro symptoms, reflux, vomiting, food allergies? Are there dental issues, problems like that? Anything that physically could be contributing to your child's feeding difficulties. And if there are, that a physical problem is something a GP or a paediatrician absolutely can help with, and that, great. Are there any skill-based problems? And so this is where we talk about our feeding milestones. And very often people will look at a child, say, for example, an autistic child who's eating Pringles, and say, they're eating Pringles, therefore they're fine. But if Pringles is one of only 3 foods that they can eat, and they're all exactly the same consistency, then actually, have they got the skills they need to actually eat other sorts of food? And actually what we find is very often they don't. A lot of children, because they from very, very early on, they had that negative experience with food and with developing eating skills, they've got very, very delayed oral motor skills. So they don't have the chewing skills, and they've got a very hypersensitive gag reflex. That gag reflex is never kind of diminished and gone further back in the mouth as it does with adults. And that prevents them from actually, even if they wanted to have a go and try things, if they try it, it's difficult. It makes them gag, and so therefore that negative feeling is reinforced. But there's lots of stuff that we can do to really help children with their skill development that actually makes eating a lot less difficult. And if we can make something less difficult, and if we can make it less painful, well, they're more likely to have a go and do it. So there's a lot we can be doing around medical and skills-based. And the skills-based would be asking for a referral to a speech and language therapist to look at sort of like the oral motor skills, and an occupational therapist to work on those every day, the sensory side that will be impacting on those self-help skills and things like that. We do know there's a challenge with getting referrals accepted, because we know that there are those services are inundated, and often you'll have OT services that say, oh, we don't do sensory, and that's it. Just end off. We do equipment, but we don't do sensory. So that we recognise as a charity, that's one of the reasons we set up, is because we know there is a lack of good information and advice and support out there, especially around the skills-based. And we have got some free advice on our website around skills development that parents can access. But so we talk about the medical, we talk about the skills space, and then we would gather information on the nutritional consequences. So we would encourage parents to do like a little baseline diet. So literally 3 or 4 days worth of noting down exactly what their child eats, the time of day, how much and what it is. And that shows a real pattern of actually how little they are eating or how restricted that diet is. And of course, from the back of that, you can look at that and think, well, actually, they are only eating 5 foods, and those 5 foods are all carbohydrate based. And we can't get a nutritional supplement in, or we can't get a vitamin in. So actually, this child is at real risk of nutritional deficiency, at which point that's evidence to refer to a dietitian.
Right.
And then finally, and it's a big area, but it's often the one that is most dismissed. It's what we would call the psychosocial domain. So it's the psychological and social and emotional impact.
Yeah.
We come back to that whole impact on the family and the child. And this is the one area where people kind of go, oh, get over yourselves, really. And this is often the hardest to get, especially medical professionals, to really, really understand. But it's so important. It's so important to actually, again, gather that information about the impact on you, on your family, on their child's ability to access education. A lot of our children will struggle at meal times at school, and if school don't understand what their feeding challenges are and they aren't making reasonable adaptations, that child might be going all day without eating.
Which is going to have an impact on, you say, accessing education, but also behaviour.
Yeah, of course. Huge impact. You said there was all that. Yeah, this research that's been done on the importance of children having a good breakfast. Oh, my goodness me. Good breakfast can be the most difficult meal of the day. You've got the pressure to get out the house for a certain time. And if you've got a child with a feeding or an eating disorder, our first meal of the day is really, really hard, because the one thing our children feel acutely is pressure. As parents, we are under immense amounts of pressure. So, of course, we will naturally try and encourage our child in every which way we can to eat, because we're desperate for them to eat. And even well-meaning praise and encouragement and a little bit of gentle bribery, in the hope that their child will eat something, even that actually, we know that our children with real feeding and eating disorders, you just hit a brick wall, and it makes it even harder.
Strategies for the family. Simple techniques can help your child's relationship to food. Here's how that might work. And what you're saying there is very familiar to me, the mornings. So my daughter, she's 7 at the moment, and the school mornings are a battle zone, because you've got to get the uniform on, I've got 2 other children that I need to get ready. And breakfast, we were both having meltdowns.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I was thinking, well, you can't go to school without a good breakfast because then you won't be able to concentrate. You might have a meltdown. I'm worried about the impact it will have on the class,
Yeah.
So I've kind of put a strategy in place. I bought a cheap bento box and she has some dried cereal, some crackers, a bit of fruit, because she will eat some variety of food, but again, we come out of schools because one of her safe foods is Nutella. You can't obviously have that in school because of nut allergies. So you're having to constantly make adaptations around the world that you're living in. So this one very simple adaptation that she eats her breakfast in the car. We have a half-hour car journey. She gets to school usually a little more regulated, and it takes an enormous pressure off me.
Yeah.
Is that something you would suggest parents do, is try and figure out a way, if it's a cereal bar rather than a bowl of cereal?
Oh, absolutely. As we said earlier, all food is
food.
Is food, yeah. And actually, I think especially first thing, we're tired in the morning and our kids are tired in the morning, and we know our brains take a while to kind of to get going. And if we always come back to the fact that our children's relationship with food is very, very different to ours. They don't get up in the morning, I'm
starving,
hungry, and what should I have for breakfast this morning? I really fancy a bacon sandwich, no, I have to wait for the weekend for that. It's a bit of a treat. It's a completely different relationship with food. Very often, food will be the absolute last thing in their mind. And a lot of our children, we talked about the internal senses earlier on, interoception being an internal sense. And that's our internal body senses: pain, heat, the ability to regulate your temperature when you feel heat and cold, knowing that you need to go to the toilet. Hunger cues.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of our children don't register hunger cues in the same way. So they're just not hungry. So if you're not hungry, maybe you're iron deficient as well. You probably are. You're iron deficient. And this is difficult. It's hard. Would you, first thing in the morning, when you're feeling tired, if you think about, okay, for you, what would be a really tricky difficult thing that you'd have to do for you?
Probably make myself breakfast, if I'm honest.
Okay.
Because I'll be fixating on making sure the children are fed, but I won't eat until
later on in the day. But you won't eat until later on in the day, absolutely. And if I said to you, right, Rosie, you have got to eat, you've got to eat a good breakfast by 7 o'clock in the morning, are you going to be sitting there going, I'm looking forward to this?
No, it's a pressure.
It's a real pressure. And actually, the more pressure you feel, the less you want to eat it. So absolutely, I think certainly with breakfast, you just go with what works.
Yeah.
And actually nutritionally, I wouldn't worry about the nutritional content of breakfast. It's calories in, basically. Yes. It's just energy, calories in, and go with what works for your family. Because it's very, very difficult to try and make changes and try and make improvements and do things properly, if you like, at a really, really fractious time.
Yes.
Yeah. If you've got to learn to do something that's hard and it's difficult and it requires concentration, you need to pick your timing. Yeah. You've got to pick a time of day when you're well regulated. You're not hungry.
Both of us.
You can focus. And actually, that's not going to be breakfast time, is it? It's going to be a completely different time of day.
Tackling the fear of shame. It's okay to feel that food is a tough subject to tackle, and reassuring to learn that your child's feeding difficulties are not your fault. I think it would be helpful now to talk a little bit about shame. I know we touched on it previously. However, this is a really, really sensitive issue for a lot of parents, this fear of judgment. I feel the judgment, Cocoa Pops, that sort of thing. How can parents give themselves a little bit more kindness and compassion around this area? Because you and I, we can sit here and say fed is best, food is food, it's important that they eat. But when you are the school mum that's dishing out chocolate bars after school instead of home-baked bran muffins, it's easy to feel that you are failing in some way. And I can, you perhaps hear the emotion in my voice as I say it, because I am one of those parents. And I'm just wondering if you could offer some reassurance, some guidance for those parents that are feeling a little bit helpless.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to sit with it for a bit, actually, and just kind of not let our emotional brain just kind of go, oh, don't worry, I'll be fine. You'll be okay. And just actually really accept this is hard. This is really hard. And if there's one key thing I can say to any parent out there listening, your child's feeding differences are not your fault.
Yeah.
100% are not your fault. And every weird and wonderful thing any parent that's walked through our feeding clinic door has done to try and get their child to eat, and believe you me, we have seen them all. We've seen some really, really interesting cases of how, have you got a kitchen sink? Our child only eats in a bowl of bubbles in the kitchen sink, literally, and that child is 2.5. You will do what you can to get your child to eat, right?
Yes.
Because actually, what you have found the most amazing and creative and imaginative ways to effectively keep your child alive.
Yeah.
Because actually, everything we've spoken about throughout this whole podcast is, what's the brain telling you to do? Your brain is actually telling you not to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's your brain has got other priorities that are overriding, and as a parent, you are doing everything you possibly can to help regulate your child, so actually they can bypass those really strong, powerful brain signals that are telling them not to eat, and actually nourish their child.
And as you said that, I'm thinking a dysregulated child is never going to eat.
No.
So when dinner time becomes a battleground,
yeah,
it's you're fighting a losing battle, because
100%.
you're not going to have an argument with them and then they're going to sit and eat their carrots.
Yeah, no, absolutely not, or anything at all, actually.
Yeah, quite.
Quite. Yeah, and mealtime dysregulation is huge. And again, this is one of those really judgy things. Mealtime dysregulation to people on the outside looks like badly behaved children, and poor parenting. And that's what, as parents, that's what they feel they're being judged, that, by other people. They just think, oh God, can someone sort that child out? It's horrible. It's visceral sort of gut feeling of, oh my God, everyone's judging me.
Yeah.
And all I can say, social media is there's so much toxic noise out there on social media, and there's so much unhelpful advice out there on social media as well. And as you said earlier on, even sort of well-meaning advice can actually be really, really quite harmful. And I think as parents, we have to trust your instinct, actually. And you have to, your child best. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, your child best. And whilst as professionals, if you like, there's information, there's advice we can share on actually how you can support your child's development in this area of learning to eat. At the end of the day, that child's eating does not exist within a vacuum. That child's eating exists within a whole family network, and we never ever see eating difficulties exist on their own. There's always
something behind it. There's
always other things going on, and they're very, very complex. And I think this is one of the challenges. We're kind of going back a little bit, springing back to diagnosis and stuff. This is one of the difficulties, is because there's no one health professional that goes, oh yeah, I've got the fix for that. Mm-hmm. They're so complex. There's so many different elements going on that actually there are lots of different people that maybe need to support that family, and there seem to be lots and lots of hoops that they need to jump through to try and get that support.
Framing how we talk about food. The terminology we use when talking about food is so important. In this section, we find out just why that is. So if somebody's listening now and they have a child, and I don't know whether mild ARFID is a thing, but a child that they perhaps have 5 or 6 safe foods that they can offer them and they will eat them. I've heard of a term called jagging. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So food jagging is when a child has only got a limited or restricted diet repertoire of foods, as you've said. And what happens is they eat the same thing again and again and again and again. And then one day, literally, for seemingly no reason at all, we don't know why, the brain just kind of goes, no, I'm done.
My freezer is testament to this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think yours and many other people's. And it's a real challenge. And it's one of the things that as parents, because we wanting to feed our child, so what you'll say, you go out and you buy, 20 packets of whatever it might be and stock your freezer up with it so that you know that you can keep on giving this to your child. But the difficulty is with food jagging, we know is if that child keeps on having them again and again and again, they are more likely and at risk of losing it. So what can we do to preserve safe foods? There are two main things I would say. The first I would say is stop calling them safe foods.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, because what's the opposite of
An
safe?
unsafe food.
Unsafe or even dangerous.
Gosh, yes. It's so terminology is so important.
So by calling your child's foods these are their safe foods, what you're implying is that everything they don't eat
is not safe.
Is not safe. And if you've got an autistic child that's very, very rule-driven and very sort of, black and white in their thinking, you can't, if something's unsafe, there's, no amount of you telling me that it's fine. You will know it's not my safe food, therefore it must be unsafe. So we use the term same food.
Same food.
Same, S-A-M-E, same food. So it sounds very similar. But because what's the opposite of same?
Different.
Yeah. So the foods they eat aren't dangerous, they're just different. So the foods that you eat are different, and different is okay. We can learn about different. It's not harmful to us. So those small shifts in just reframing how we talk about food can be really, really, really powerful.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, and it can really help our children to kind of reframe the way they think about food as well and take out some of that fear behind it.
And where does jagging fit in with this?
And so where jagging will fit in with that, what we would do is, so one of the strategies we use at our charity is we've got a menu planner, which it helps provide, it is literally as it sounds, it's like a menu plan for the week, and we can stick it on the wall and you can write down what you're going to have on it for the week. And it's a really great tool for families to use inclusively, so everyone can kind of pick a meal. So if you've got a family of 5, everyone gets to pick at least one meal a week that they want, and they can put it on the menu planner. But it's really important that on your menu planner, you've always got on there a section for your child's same food.
Yeah.
So you might have Monday, lunchtime and dinner, Tuesday, lunchtime and dinner. And you might be having, I don't know, what are you going to have for lunch today? Have you got any ideas?
Ham sandwich?
Ham sandwich, absolutely. I wouldn't be having a ham sandwich, thank you very much. So I would be having my same food instead. So I can see what I'm having and I can see what you're having, and it gives nice structure and predictability to the week. But if I've got a very, very, very restricted diet, so I only eat, say, Pringles, I only eat What's-Its, I only eat mini cheddars, Jacob's cream crackers, breadsticks, they are lovely. There we are. I only eat those 5 things. On the menu planner, what we can do is we can rotate those things across the week, and you can adapt these to the communication level of your child. So if your child is non-speaking, you can use symbols so they can see exactly that their same food is coming up. They can see where it is. They know it. They know they're getting their same foods, but you don't end up giving them breadsticks 5 times a day.
Yeah.
But you also know that your child, whilst you are you're providing a little bit of variability even within their very, very restricted diet.
And I guess as well, by seeing the family menu, you are introducing to them the concept of different foods. Absolutely. Without any pressure.
Without any pressure, yeah, exactly.
Because one of the things I realised, fairly far into parenting, was that it was okay for my child to sit at the table and have a different dinner, or to not eat, just to come and sit with us and be with us. Yeah. Because actually, when you see other people eating things, that's when the kind of curiosity might spark a little bit. Maybe not, but by having it there and available, they are at least seeing people eating a wider variety of food. Yeah, and if we go back to the reframing, how we think about eating as a skill that you've got to learn, it's like any other skill. We learn through watching people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we learn to talk by talking with other people or being shown how to use alternative forms of communication. If we were just to leave a child to sit in a corner and not talk to them or not give them any other form of way of communicating, they wouldn't learn to communicate. They would be very dysregulated,
children who've got no way to express themselves at all. They, on some level, we have to teach them. We have to show them how to do it. But what we need to recognise is that autistic children, particularly, their learning style will be individual to them. And so, what our job is to think, well, how can we adapt the way we do things to suit your learning style, and just teach them in a different way.
Distraction and learning to discuss food. How our autistic children learn about food can be different, so a mixture of distraction and discussion can help, as we hear now. So for a neurodivergent family, it could look like, 3 people have got the main meal, one child has got some boiled rice and is watching their iPad, another one might have some finger food. So, and it's things like iPads or screens at meal times as well. They're another contentious issue. And this is not an episode about screen time, but I do think it's important we kind of touch on this a little bit, because when you become a parent, absolutely no screens during meal times. But actually, sometimes when you have got, particularly an autistic child, having that little bit of distraction while they're eating might enable them to fill their tummies, essentially. But I know that it is important that they learn the skill before the iPad is there at meal times. Am I right in saying that?
It is. It's a real tricky one, because you've got the whole pressure of and it's a very, if you find that the only way you can get your child to eat anything is with that distraction, effectively they're mindlessly eating. They're effectively zoning out completely, Natalie. So they're zoning out, and you're sort of helicoptering food in whilst they're really not registering it at all. And what we would always want to advocate for is a child who is in control of what's going in their own mouth, and a child who knows what they're eating. And the only way they can do that is actually if they learn about the food that's in front of them. But as I said, for our autistic children, that how they learn that might look very, very different to how a typically developing child might learn skills. And what we might need to do is there's no black and white answer. So what we might need to do is say, well, actually, to get the calories in, we need screen time, because actually I know I've just got to get these calories in. But actually, it's really important maybe at another time of the day when the pressure isn't on, to provide some opportunities around food where we can learn about it, and we can learn skills like, using that descriptive language, for example. We can learn what food looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like, how we can stab it with a fork or cut it with a knife. So we can learn about foods, but not in that high pressure mealtime environment where the child's going to be thinking, oh my God, the pressure's on, you're going to make me eat it, and therefore I'm going to be very dysregulated, I'm going to get down from the table.
And these are all skills that we can implement without having to go see a doctor as well. So whilst you're perhaps waiting for a referral or trying to get some professional help, these are things that parents can do themselves already to support their child and to make their lives a little less stressful as well.
Absolutely, yeah. The one thing I would say, again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here, is when it comes to learning to eat, there's a real myth that children will just learn to do it. It's just automatic. It's only instinctive. It's only automatic for the first 3 months of life. After that, as soon as the brain has volitional control over the muscles, they have to relearn the skill of learning to eat all over again. So whilst the swallowing, that bit, actual swallow, that bit is a reflex. Everything that happens in the mouth before then, we have to learn to do. And that's often where we see the problem starting. So children will not automatically learn unless we teach them in the same way that we teach them to talk, we teach them to walk. We have to teach children to learn to eat as well. But it's really, really important that we recognise that autistic children have got different learning styles, and the same methods that you might use with a typically developing child can be quite harmful, quite traumatic for a child with autism. So I think you said on the train on the way up here, you had the mum in front of you with a child with a lunchbox saying, oh, and when you've eaten that, you can have your your chocolate button or whatever it might be. That kind of approach with the child, that negotiation, and that sort of
pleasure delay almost.
Yeah, is actually, that's just going to raise the anxiety level and make the whole thing a lot harder and put on pressure which will make the whole situation a lot more difficult, and your child is more likely to refuse. So we have to kind of flip it around and look at how we can provide opportunities for learning, but without expectation that you must eat this in the way that I expect you to.
Working with school. Sensory issues at school can be challenging at the best of time. So now we listen to how best to approach school about eating. I'm also thinking now about schools and school dinners. And before you even get to the actual food, you've got to allow, particularly, I'm talking mainstream schools here primarily, you've got a loud food hall, you've got lots of people, lots of smells, lots of noises, and then you are given a meal that you really have very little control over. So for a lot of autistic children in general, this is challenging. But if you've got a child with ARFID, this is going to be possibly terrifying. So parents might be able to send in a packed lunch as an alternative, but then you might come up against school restrictions on what can be included in that packed lunch. So have you got any advice for parents about how they can approach the school, reasonable adjustments that they should expect to be made?
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head where you've just said reasonable adjustments there, because we wouldn't think twice about, for example, a child with dyslexia, making reasonable adjustments in terms of the equipment they use, or giving them a quiet workspace, giving them overlays, allowing them to use a computer. We wouldn't think twice about. But again, when it comes to eating, where are those reasonable adjustments? So I think using that sort of language is really, really important, because schools know that legally they should be making reasonable adjustments. And actually, if they have got a child with significant difficulties in it, and again, I suppose this is where we can kind of come back to, don't worry if you don't need a diagnosis, but come back to, look, these across all of these different domains, they've got medical challenges, they've got skill-based challenges, they've got nutritional challenges, they've got psychosocial challenges, difficulties across all these different areas. This is a problem that needs to be taken seriously, and these are the reasonable adaptations that need to be made. And getting a letter of support maybe from a dietitian or a GP might help. It's something that you can do, but certainly schools have got a legal duty to actually make those adaptations. And school training is quite a big part of what we do at the charity. Yeah, because there is, again, the myths and misconceptions around eating, and just leave the child, and when they're hungry enough, they'll eat it. That's absolutely rife in schools, because they're not taught anything about feeding development. They're not taught anything about child development, full stop. So there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstandings in schools. So there's a large bit of training that needs to go on there as well.
Misconceptions around feeding difficulties. Myths and misconceptions around food can be damaging. Let's get the expert view on the risks involved. Throughout the work that you're doing, what would you say, and I'm going to use the word damaging, most damaging misconceptions around feeding and eating disorders in children are?
I mean, probably the number one up there is if they'll eat if they're hungry.
Yeah.
That has to be the most commonly held misconception, and it's a tricky one, because actually for 97% of the population,
we will eat when we're hungry.
They will eat when we're hungry, because our relationship with food is very different. And actually, a lot of people have the opposite problem. They'll eat too much, even when they're not hungry. So it makes very, very difficult for people to understand that there are a small group of children, or seemingly small group of children, who actually won't eat when they're hungry. And I say a seemingly small group of children because about 3% of the general paediatric population would be classified as having a serious paediatric feeding disorder. So a proper significant problem with learning to eat. But if you take children with neurodevelopmental difficulties and differences, that rises to about 80% of those children.
How many, sorry?
80.
80?
80.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, it's massively high. And those children will not just eat when they're hungry. And that is because, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, the brain's priorities and the need to eat being overridden by other key survival instincts, being breathing, avoiding pain, and we talked about postural stability, that weird dizzy one. And with these children, these are the children, they'll end up in A&E. And we've seen it time and time again. And it's been well-meaning medical practitioners sometimes saying, just leave them. Just leave them, and they will eat when they're hungry. And especially with very, very young children, the highest risk actually that we see very, very quickly is dehydration.
Yeah.
And they get dehydrated very, very quickly. So we'll often see this with children who are really struggling to transition off a predominantly milk-based diet. And that's really, really dangerous if they said, right, just stop it, just stop the bottle or stop breastfeeding, and they will magically start eating. And as I said to you, if I put that plate of grubs down in front of you, and I can leave that there for probably 48 hours, and you still
wouldn't eat it.
I'm not going to eat it. And that is probably the most harmful one. But the second really it's well-meaning advice, but it is misconception again, is this real notion of healthy and unhealthy food. And whilst we know that there's so much evidence and there's so much research about, diet and heart disease and diet and diabetes, etc., actually, when you are talking about young children growing up, the key thing that their body needs is calories. Mm-hmm. It's energy to grow, because what their brain and their body needs, it's just fuel at this stage. It really is. And whilst they are that little bodies are quite resilient in terms of that you have to get very restricted before you get nutritional deficiencies. So that's why we sort of say, if you can get a vitamin supplement or something, that's really, really great. But actually, the key important thing is calories in.
And I think one point that I think is quite important we do touch on is this idea that a child is choosing to do this, that a child could have the understanding, the comprehension to restrict their diet in order to cause disruption to the family, to be difficult. And of course, even if the child is actively choosing not to eat the food, they're not doing it because they want to make family life challenging. They're not doing it because they want to be nutritionally deficient. They're doing it for a deeper reason than that. And I think this idea that children are being difficult when they're selective eating or they might have ARFID, I think that's one of the real myths that needs to sort of be put to bed.
Absolutely. And it's such a complex issue to unpack, because again, there's no one, they're not choosing, they're doing this instead. It's such a, I think one of the things we've talked about today is it's just the complexity and the different levels and the impact that child's ability to actually see a plate of food and eat it. And there are so many barriers in front of that child that are making just the sheer act of eating sometimes painful, always very, very difficult. And I will say time and time again, the human body and the human brain is organised in a very simple way. And if something hurts and if something is difficult, you are going to avoid it. And that's not people choosing to be awkward. That's just survival. That's just instinct taking over. And why would a child choose not to do something that everyone around them seems to love, that brings everyone pleasure? Why would a child choose to make their parents unhappy, to make their teachers unhappy? Children aren't built like that. Children, they're we, as human beings, we want to please, don't we? And that's not something that a child would ever choose to do.
Early support equals better outcomes. Getting support quickly is always good. Here we learn why help for a child with nutritional deficiencies is vital and the impact it has on their lives every day. With sort of traditional eating disorders, we talk about recovery. With something like ARFID, is there recovery? Is that a term that you would use? What does recovery look like in a child that has an incredibly restricted diet?
Yeah, I would say the way I would frame it is to say that, especially with autistic individuals, they're always going to have feeding differences.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always going to have a different relationship with food. And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when those differences tip over into a disorder and they become nutritionally at risk. And in terms of the social isolation becomes so overwhelming and so challenging for them and their family, that's when you really need to sort of look at supporting and how can we actually support that child or young person to diversify their diet, because it has such a big impact on their day-to-day life and their ability to function. And when you have something that has such a big impact on their day-to-day functioning, that then becomes embedded in part of who they are. It becomes part of their identity. And those are the children that then go on to develop eating disorders, because they have a very, they begin to believe that that I can't do this. That
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling, absolutely, and it becomes so much more challenging when they believe that this is something that they will never be able to overcome. But we would always. This is why we always sort of say the earlier you can support a child on their feeding development journey, the better, because if you can recognise that their relationship with food and their developmental pathway is not going down the typical route, it's kind of going off on a different pathway. Recognise that it's different, but support them with those adaptations at home, so you can provide safety and stability and routine to make this really difficult learning journey a little bit easier for them. You can maybe prevent them from going on to develop a more severe eating disorder, because children will try and gain that control for themselves, and that's when it becomes even more restricted. I think it's really important to state that you're not trying to fix children's feeding, and this is something that we can try and help parents to understand, because they feel so much judgment. They want that perfect eater. They want that child to eat, that lovely variety of foods across all the different food groups, etc., etc. But it's getting to a stage where they can eat an adequate amount of foods or from across the different food groups, or they will accept nutritional and or vitamin supplements, which means that they are nutritionally safe, if you like, and they have enough energy and enough nutrients to grow. But it's we need to move away from the very, very medical side and just also recognise the important social and emotional sort of aspects. And you sort of talked about going on holiday, and actually that fear of, I can't go on holiday, I can't go anywhere else because there might not be something my child can eat. So working towards a position where your child might still, or, the young person will still be very restricted in what they eat, but actually, they can go anywhere and they can eat garlic bread from, but
you say that.
But they can eat a garlic bread from Pizza Hut. They can eat one from Prezzo. They can eat one from the freezer aisle at Tesco's. They can eat garlic bread in many different varieties, as opposed to just they will only eat one certain sort of garlic bread that's only available from one place. So often it's looking at variety within the accepted range, but then opens up the sort of like the social possibilities for that family.
And for them as well, as they get older, you want them to be able to go out for dinner and meals and coffees and things with their friends. You don't want them to become socially isolated because of their relationship with food.
Absolutely. And a lot of our older learners really enjoy food preparation.
Yes.
And they love cooking for other people, so they can take real pleasure in food and in cooking and in preparing food for other people. They might not eat that themselves, or they might only eat a certain bit of it, but they can have a really lovely role to play and have a great relationship with food. But it will still, it looks different to what other people are doing, but different is fine. I have to say success looks very different for every family. Sometimes it might be, you might have some children that come through and actually they make huge amounts of progress with the variety of foods they eat, and you think, oh gosh, that's
cracked it.
Wow, wave the magic wand, as it were. But with a lot of our families, it's reframing things and helping them and supporting them to go along that feeding journey with their child and make those adaptations to support their child to learn to eat in a different way, and often recognising the importance of movement with a lot of our children, and recognising that a lot of our children need to move before they can kind of come and sit down and eat, for example, rather than expecting children to kind of go from sort of like sitting on the sofa, engaged in an activity that they're doing on the iPad or what have you it might be, and then all of a sudden come to the table and start eating. That's such a difficult transition. And so supporting parents to understand the steps that they need to take in order to support their child to transition. And it might not even be transitioning to a table, it might be transitioning to a sofa, but actually being able to eat together and eat around other people, because so many of our autistic children really struggle with eating around others, and all the social and the communication demands and the sensory demands that are placed on them with eating around others. And it's helping parents to understand all of the different demands and conflicting bits of information that are going on for that child. And again, supporting them to make reasonable adaptations to the environment, put in sensory supports before they come to mealtime. So doing some movement-based activities to help get them regulated before they actually come and sit down to do what for them is quite a difficult activity.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I suppose, just to summarise really, if somebody is listening right now and they are thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds like my child, what would be the first step for them? You said the GP, but I'm thinking perhaps go to your website first, go to the Feeding Trust, arm yourself with the dossier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got some really good. If you head to our website, we've got a whole section on free resources, and on there we've got the sort of the checklist that you can download it. You can either have it on your phone or you can print it out, and you can take it to the GP, and it kind of goes through all the different aspects, and you can sort of say, look,
I'm not making it up.
Look at there's all these different things, and we talked about getting video and bits and pieces to get a bit of evidence. But there's also on the website, there's a lot of information that goes into quite a lot of detail about different sorts of feeding disorders and eating disorders. So we talk about paediatric feeding disorders and ARFID and how they can kind of develop, how they look, what they look like, and some basic sort of first line sort of advice really.
Yeah.
So some good first line advice that you can be doing at home to really support your child. But also it's the kind of thing you can take into school as well, and sort of say to school, look, these are things that you could be doing at school that aren't arduous, that don't require any extra time or effort, or it's just reframing the way you approach this, so that we're coming from a position of adaptation and support rather than expectation and demand.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of today's conversation, and wow, what an important one it's been. A huge thank you to Natalie Raven Morris for joining me and for sharing your insights, your knowledge and your heart.
Oh, thanks, Rosie.
And to you, our listeners, thank you for being part of this space. If this episode resonated with you or someone you know who's navigating feeding challenges, please do share it. Let's keep these conversations going. Remember, you can find more resources at optionsautism.co.uk. And if you've got questions about anything we've talked about today or in any of our episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Please make sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and keep tuning in as we unpack more of the world of autism, one conversation at a time. Take care, and I'll see you next time on Autism Unpacked.